For several explosive hours, the United States Senate transformed from a confirmation hearing into something that looked far more like a political battlefield. Democratic senators didn't simply question Todd Blanche's qualifications, they accused him of putting personal loyalty ahead of the Justice Department itself. Republicans, meanwhile, argued Blanche deserved the opportunity to lead, insisting that accusations alone shouldn't determine the outcome. The exchanges quickly became some of the most intense moments seen in the Senate Judiciary Committee this year, and by the end of the hearing, despite fierce objections from every Democratic member, the committee still voted to move Blanche's nomination forward. So what exactly happened inside that room? What accusations were made? Why did Democrats say this nomination could reshape the future of the Department of Justice? And why did Republicans insist they had no better alternative? Let's break it all down. The hearing was supposed to be a routine step in the confirmation process. Instead, it became a marathon of accusations, legal arguments, and political confrontation. Todd Blanche, who previously served as one of Donald Trump's personal attorneys before joining the Justice Department, faced intense scrutiny over whether he could act independently if confirmed to become Attorney General. Throughout the hearing, Democratic senators repeatedly questioned whether Blanche had fully separated himself from his previous role as Trump's defense lawyer. Several lawmakers argued that America's top law enforcement official must answer only to the Constitution and the public, not to any individual president. Those concerns became the central theme of nearly every Democratic statement during the hearing. One issue dominated much of the discussion: the government's handling of records related to Jeffrey Epstein. Several Democratic senators sharply criticized how certain materials had been managed and argued that the Justice Department owed the public greater transparency. They also questioned decisions surrounding the release of documents and how victims had been affected. Blanche rejected suggestions that he had acted improperly, but that response did little to calm the room. Instead, questioning became even more confrontational. Senators pressed him on previous legal decisions, his role in agreements involving the federal government, and whether his past relationship with President Trump could influence future actions if confirmed. As the hearing continued, Republicans defended Blanche, arguing that many of the criticisms reflected political disagreements rather than evidence that he could not perform the job fairly. The divide inside the committee became unmistakable. Every exchange underscored just how polarized the confirmation process had become. And by the time lawmakers prepared to vote, it was clear that neither side had persuaded the other. What happened next would expose one of the sharpest partisan splits over a Justice Department nomination in recent memory. As soon as the committee moved beyond opening remarks, the atmosphere inside the hearing room changed dramatically. This was no longer a routine confirmation hearing. Democratic senators began laying out a series of criticisms they argued raised serious questions about Todd Blanche's judgment and independence if confirmed as Attorney General. One of the earliest and most forceful lines of questioning centered on the Justice Department's handling of records connected to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Several Democratic members argued that the release of certain documents had created confusion and raised concerns about transparency. They questioned why some records appeared to be released at different times than others and whether all relevant materials had been made public. The senators argued that public confidence in the Justice Department depends not only on following the law, but also on maintaining transparency and accountability in high-profile investigations. According to the questioning during the hearing, they believed those standards had not been met. One senator suggested that additional records should still be disclosed under existing law and questioned why they remained unavailable. The exchange immediately set a confrontational tone. Instead of discussing future policy priorities, much of the hearing focused on past decisions. That theme continued throughout the afternoon. Democratic Senator Adam Schiff then delivered one of the hearing's sharpest critiques. Rather than questioning Blanche's legal abilities, Schiff argued that the larger issue was whether Blanche could separate himself from his previous role as Donald Trump's personal attorney. Schiff acknowledged Blanche's experience as a lawyer, but he argued that serving as the nation's chief law enforcement officer requires complete independence from any former client. According to Schiff, the Attorney General represents the American people, not any president or political figure. He warned that public trust in the Justice Department depends on citizens believing that investigations and prosecutions are conducted fairly, regardless of politics. During his remarks, Schiff argued that Blanche had not demonstrated enough independence to earn that trust. That criticism became one of the central themes repeated by several Democratic senators throughout the hearing. Blanche, however, did not simply remain silent while these accusations were made. Throughout the questioning, he defended his record and rejected suggestions that his previous legal work automatically disqualified him from serving in government. His position was straightforward. He argued that lawyers routinely represent clients without adopting every position those clients hold. Serving as defense counsel, he suggested, is fundamentally different from serving as Attorney General. Supporters of his nomination echoed that argument. Republican senators maintained that every attorney deserves to be judged on professional qualifications rather than on the identity of former clients. They argued that previous legal representation should not become a permanent barrier to public service. To Republicans on the committee, the confirmation process had become increasingly political. Instead of evaluating Blanche's ability to manage the Justice Department, they suggested Democrats were attempting to relitigate political controversies involving President Trump. That disagreement created one of the hearing's biggest divisions. Both parties claimed they were defending the integrity of the Justice Department, but they offered completely different definitions of what that meant. As questioning continued, the conversation broadened beyond the Epstein-related issues. Several senators raised concerns about broader ethics questions, prior legal agreements, and whether recent decisions involving the Justice Department reflected appropriate independence. Democrats argued these issues formed a pattern they believed deserved careful scrutiny before confirming anyone to lead federal law enforcement. Republicans countered that many of the allegations remained disputed and should not automatically prevent confirmation. Neither side appeared willing to concede ground. Every exchange became increasingly pointed. At times, senators interrupted one another. The tension inside the committee room became impossible to ignore. Observers watching the hearing could see that this was no ordinary confirmation process. It had evolved into a larger debate over the future direction of the Justice Department itself. And the most dramatic confrontation of the day was still ahead. Because next, another Democratic senator would focus attention on one of the hearing's most controversial subjects, Blanche's reported interactions related to Ghislaine Maxwell, and argue that those decisions reflected a troubling approach to justice. Those exchanges would become some of the most widely discussed moments from the entire hearing and would further deepen the divide between Democrats and Republicans before the committee finally prepared to vote. By the halfway point of the hearing, it was clear that this confirmation battle had become about much more than one nominee. The discussion shifted from legal qualifications to a broader question. Can the next Attorney General truly operate independently from the president who appointed him? That question dominated the next round of exchanges. One of the strongest moments came when Democratic Senator Cory Booker took the floor. Booker argued that the Department of Justice exists to protect the rule of law equally for everyone, regardless of wealth, influence, or political power. He then turned to one of the hearing's most controversial topics. Booker questioned decisions involving convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell, focusing on reports about meetings between Justice Department leadership and Maxwell while she was serving her prison sentence. He argued those meetings were highly unusual and asked why victims had waited years for opportunities to be heard, while senior officials reportedly met directly with Maxwell. According to Booker, public confidence in the justice system depends not only on outcomes, but also on the appearance of fairness. He suggested that decisions surrounding those meetings had fueled public skepticism. The senator repeatedly returned to one point. If the Justice Department expects Americans to trust its decisions, he argued, every action must withstand intense public scrutiny. Booker then broadened his criticism. He questioned whether the department's priorities had become too focused on protecting political leadership rather than strengthening public confidence in federal law enforcement. His argument wasn't simply about one investigation. He described what he believed was a larger issue involving institutional independence. In his view, the Attorney General must be willing to make difficult decisions even when they conflict with the wishes of the president who nominated them. That, Booker argued, is one of the Justice Department's most important responsibilities. Whether viewers agreed with him or not, his remarks became one of the most widely discussed moments of the hearing. Another Democratic senator followed with a similar line of questioning. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse argued that accountability and transparency are essential whenever the Justice Department handles matters involving nationally significant investigations. He questioned several decisions surrounding the handling of Epstein-related records and argued that mistakes in releasing documents had harmed public trust while also affecting victims' privacy. Whitehouse maintained that leadership at the Department of Justice ultimately bears responsibility when errors occur. He argued that the Attorney General cannot simply distance himself from controversial decisions once they become public. Instead, he said, accountability must begin at the top. Throughout his remarks, Whitehouse repeatedly emphasized that restoring trust in the Justice Department should be a priority for whoever ultimately leads the agency. Republican senators, however, viewed the situation very differently. Rather than seeing evidence of misconduct, they argued Democrats were drawing conclusions from disputed facts and political disagreements. Several Republican members reminded the committee that confirmation hearings are designed to evaluate a nominee's qualifications, not to retry years of political controversy. Supporters of Blanche argued that every administration faces criticism from its opponents. They said confirmation decisions should be based on competence, experience, and legal ability rather than partisan conflict. That defense highlighted the fundamental divide inside the committee. To Democrats, the hearing centered on accountability and independence. To Republicans, it centered on fairness and the presumption that nominees deserve to be evaluated on their professional record unless clear evidence shows otherwise. Neither side showed any sign of backing down. As the hearing continued, the exchanges became even more detailed. Lawmakers began debating legal agreements, ethics questions, and whether recent actions by the Justice Department reflected appropriate boundaries between political leadership and federal law enforcement. At times, senators interrupted each other. Committee members challenged explanations almost as quickly as they were given. The atmosphere inside the room remained tense from start to finish. By now, everyone watching understood that the final vote was unlikely to change many minds. But the questioning still mattered. Each senator was building a public record, one that supporters and critics alike would point to long after the hearing ended, and the next round of questioning would become even more contentious. Senator Adam Schiff would return with detailed questions about legal agreements involving tax matters, pressing Blanche over whether those agreements could create the appearance of preferential treatment for President Trump. Those exchanges would produce some of the hearing's most technical and politically charged moments before the committee moved toward its final vote. By this point in the hearing, nearly every major issue had been debated, but Democratic senators weren't finished. Instead of moving toward closing statements, they shifted the focus to another series of questions that they argued went directly to the heart of Todd Blanche's judgment and independence. One of the committee's longest exchanges came when Senator Adam Schiff returned for another round of questioning. This time, the discussion centered on a legal agreement involving tax matters and whether its language could affect future accountability. Schiff carefully walked through portions of the agreement, asking Blanche whether it could be interpreted as limiting potential tax liability connected to President Trump or entities associated with him. Blanche rejected that interpretation. He repeatedly maintained that the agreement should not be read as providing blanket immunity and argued that future tax filings would still be subject to the normal legal process. The exchange quickly became highly technical. Both men referred to the wording of the agreement, but they reached very different conclusions about what its legal effect actually was. Schiff wasn't simply debating legal language. His larger argument was about public perception. He suggested that even if lawyers could disagree over the exact wording, the appearance of special treatment for any president could damage confidence in the Justice Department. According to Schiff, Americans need to believe that every citizen, including the president, is subject to the same legal standards. Without that confidence, he argued, trust in federal law enforcement becomes harder to maintain. Blanche responded that the agreement had been misunderstood and emphasized that future legal obligations would continue to apply under existing law. Neither side appeared satisfied with the other's explanation. Soon afterward, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse returned to the discussion with another forceful statement. He argued that recent documents submitted during the confirmation process did little to resolve the committee's concerns. According to Whitehouse, simply issuing new statements could not erase questions about earlier decisions or eliminate uncertainty about how similar situations might be handled in the future. Whitehouse urged senators to focus not only on the legal technicalities, but also on the broader issue of trust. His message was straightforward. Leadership at the Department of Justice depends heavily on credibility. Once public confidence begins to erode, restoring it becomes far more difficult. He warned that confirmation decisions should consider both legal qualifications and the long-term reputation of the institution. Another Democratic senator echoed those concerns, arguing that last-minute documents presented during the hearing did not fundamentally answer the committee's questions. He suggested that changing paperwork after controversy arises does not necessarily resolve the underlying issues that prompted the criticism in the first place. Throughout these exchanges, Democratic members repeatedly returned to one common theme. The Attorney General must be perceived as independent. They argued that public confidence in the Justice Department depends as much on appearance as on legal authority. Even the perception that political loyalty could influence prosecutorial decisions, they said, carries serious consequences. Republican senators, however, saw the hearing through an entirely different lens. They argued that Democrats had spent hours revisiting political disputes instead of evaluating whether Blanche possessed the experience necessary to run one of the nation's largest law enforcement agencies. Several Republicans suggested that disagreements over previous legal representation should not automatically disqualify someone from public office. To them, Blanche's legal career demonstrated experience handling complex cases under extraordinary public pressure. Supporters argued that every administration deserves qualified leadership at the Department of Justice, and that confirmation hearings should avoid becoming forums for broader political grievances. The contrast between the two parties had never been clearer. Democrats emphasized institutional independence. Republicans emphasized professional qualifications. Neither side showed any indication that their votes would change. As the afternoon stretched on, committee members realized that the hearing was approaching its conclusion. Yet the political tension inside the room continued to rise. Each senator understood that the committee vote would send a powerful signal, not only about Todd Blanche's nomination, but also about how both parties wanted the public to view the Justice Department itself. The debate had moved far beyond one nominee. It had become a larger argument about accountability, executive power, and public trust in American institutions. And despite hours of questioning, the committee still faced one final decision. Would any Republican break ranks, or would the nomination move forward exactly as party leaders expected? The answer would come in the hearing's closing moments, where every vote and every final statement would underscore just how deeply divided the Senate had become. After hours of testimony, legal arguments, and increasingly heated exchanges, the hearing entered its final stage. By now, few observers expected anyone to dramatically change their position. The debate had become less about persuading colleagues and more about making the case to the American public. Still, the closing statements revealed just how differently the two parties viewed the nomination. Democratic senators argued that the hearing had reinforced their concerns about the future independence of the Department of Justice. Republican senators, on the other hand, argued that the committee had spent hours revisiting political controversies without proving that Todd Blanche lacked the qualifications to lead the department. The gap between those two perspectives had only widened. One of the final Democratic speakers returned to a theme that had echoed throughout the hearing. He argued that an attorney general must not only follow the law, but also inspire confidence that every decision is made independently and without political influence. The senator questioned whether documents and assurances presented during the hearing were enough to resolve concerns raised by earlier actions. In his view, confidence in the Justice Department depends on more than promises. It depends on consistent public trust over time. He warned that once public confidence begins to weaken, rebuilding it becomes an enormous challenge. The point wasn't simply about one confirmation vote. It was about protecting the reputation of an institution that millions of Americans rely on. Republican senators responded by emphasizing stability. Several argued that the Justice Department needed permanent leadership rather than continuing under acting officials. They acknowledged that Democrats had raised serious objections, but maintained that none justified rejecting the nomination. One Republican senator explained that while disagreements remained, he believed Blanche deserved the opportunity to serve and should ultimately be judged by his performance in office rather than predictions about what he might do in the future. Another Republican said that after receiving additional assurances from Blanche regarding disputed issues, he was prepared to support advancing the nomination. Supporters argued that at some point the committee had to decide whether it trusted the nominee's commitments. For Republicans, the answer was yes. For Democrats, the answer remained no. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The committee clerk began calling the roll. One by one, senators announced their votes. The result unfolded almost exactly as many had anticipated. Republican members voted to advance Todd Blanche's nomination. Democratic members voted against it. When the final tally was announced, Blanche's nomination was approved by the committee and sent to the full Senate for further consideration. The hearing was officially over, but politically, the debate was only beginning. Outside the hearing room, reporters immediately sought reaction from senators on both sides. Some Democrats argued the committee had ignored serious questions they believed deserved additional scrutiny. Republicans countered that the confirmation process had worked as intended and that the full Senate would now have the opportunity to consider the nomination. One Republican senator acknowledged that some disagreements remained unresolved, but said the committee had reached the best decision possible under the circumstances. He added that he expected the Justice Department to honor the commitments discussed during the hearing. Those comments reflected the broader Republican position throughout the day. Rather than focusing on past disputes, they emphasized moving forward. Democrats, however, argued that unresolved questions about independence and accountability should have prevented the nomination from advancing. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the hearing wasn't any single exchange. It was how completely divided the committee remained from beginning to end. Very few senators appeared uncertain. Most entered the hearing with firm opinions, and after nearly an entire day of questioning, those opinions had changed very little. The debate highlighted two fundamentally different views of the Justice Department. One side argued that professional qualifications and legal experience should remain the primary standard for confirmation. The other argued that independence from political influence is equally essential, and that public confidence depends on that independence being beyond question. Those competing philosophies shaped nearly every moment of the hearing. As cameras shut off and senators left the committee room, one reality became impossible to ignore. This nomination had become about far more than Todd Blanche. It had become another chapter in the ongoing debate over the relationship between politics, the presidency, and the Department of Justice. The committee had spoken. But the larger political argument was far from settled, because next, the battle would move beyond the Judiciary Committee and into the full Senate, where the nomination and the questions raised during this hearing would receive even greater national attention. With the committee vote complete, the political battle over Todd Blanche's nomination entered a new phase. Advancing out of committee did not make him Attorney General. Instead, it cleared the way for the nomination to move before the full United States Senate, where every senator would eventually have the opportunity to debate and ultimately vote on whether he should be confirmed. But regardless of what happens in that final vote, one thing became clear during this hearing. The discussion had grown far beyond the resume of a single nominee. It became a larger debate about the future direction of the Department of Justice. For Democrats, the hearing represented what they described as a test of institutional independence. Throughout the proceedings, they argued that the Attorney General must be willing to make decisions based solely on the law, even when those decisions may conflict with the interests of the president who appointed them. They repeatedly questioned whether Blanche had demonstrated enough independence from his previous role as Donald Trump's personal attorney. In their view, preserving public confidence in federal law enforcement requires not only fairness, but also the appearance of fairness. That message remained consistent from the opening statements to the committee's final vote. Republicans viewed the hearing through a different lens. They argued that many of the objections reflected long-running political disagreements, rather than evidence that Blanche lacked the experience or ability to serve. Supporters maintained that attorneys frequently represent controversial clients and that previous legal representation should not automatically disqualify someone from public office. Several Republicans also emphasized that the Justice Department benefits from stable leadership and argued that Blanche deserved the opportunity to demonstrate his independence through his actions if confirmed. Their position ultimately prevailed inside the committee, where Republican members voted to advance the nomination while Democratic members opposed it. The hearing also highlighted how confirmation battles have changed over the years. Once viewed primarily as evaluations of legal qualifications and professional experience, modern confirmation hearings often become broader debates over executive power, institutional accountability, and public trust. This hearing followed that pattern. Questions about ethics, questions about transparency, questions about the role of the Justice Department, all became central topics alongside the nominees' qualifications. Whether viewers agreed more with the Democratic arguments or the Republican responses, the hearing underscored just how polarized Washington has become on issues involving law enforcement and the presidency. Now, attention shifts to the full Senate. Lawmakers there will have another opportunity to debate Blanche's nomination before a final confirmation vote. Supporters are expected to argue that he possesses the legal experience necessary to lead the Department of Justice. Opponents are likely to repeat many of the concerns raised during the Judiciary Committee hearing, particularly regarding independence, accountability, and public confidence in federal law enforcement. Until that vote takes place, the political debate is almost certain to continue. Whatever the final outcome, this hearing offered a revealing look at the competing visions shaping one of the most important institutions in the federal government. One side argued that experience and legal credentials should carry the greatest weight. The other argued that independence from political influence is equally essential. Those competing philosophies defined nearly every exchange throughout the day, and they will almost certainly continue shaping the debate as the nomination moves forward. Now it's your turn. Do you believe the committee reached the right decision by advancing Todd Blanche's nomination? Or do you think the concerns raised during the hearing deserved greater consideration before moving forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd like to hear your perspective. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth coverage of the biggest stories coming out of Washington. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.